Off we go. Come on. Here we go. Go on now. Good girl. Hello. Welcome to Gardener's World. Now, we haven't really had a look at the dry garden this year, but at this moment, and it only lasts for a week or so, it's got a lovely, easy flow. And the colours pick up from the Honesty to the Recreado tulips and that incredible, electric lime green of the euphorbias. And then the other greens, which of course, as May progresses, everything is filling out and greying with the textures from the greys to the deep, rich greens. And when you bear in mind that this bit of garden has by far the worst soil in the whole of Longmeadow, it shows that sometimes you don't really have to do very much to make a garden lovely. You can just stand back and enjoy it doing its thing. This week, we pay our second visit to probably the most famous of all British gardens, Sissinghurst in Kent, to find out how the team is getting on as they work to reconnect the garden with the original vision of Vita Sackville West and Harold Nicholson.
I think Sissinghurst really was one of the gardens post-war that really taught people how to garden again, how nice they could be, how they could be part of and enhance your life.
And in the first of a new series of films, Carol looks at finding the right plant for the right place.
I've come to deepest Devon to have a look at hedges, banks, to give us lots of clues about what we can grow around our boundaries.
And I shall be planting out my sweet peas in the cottage garden and my purple podded peas in the new vegetable garden. This is the mound. And we call it the mound because over the years, we've mounded up all our spoil. Building rubble, hardcore, the soil from the pond, and a few years ago, we shaped it and formed it, and very slowly, we've worked out what we want to do with it. Now, this level is all about containers, and everything is chosen primarily for its fragrance. So, for example, these are scented leaf pelargoniums, the lemon verbena. Just touch the leaf as you go by, and that intense lemony smell. And of course, this is somewhere to come and sit. And actually, it's where I will put the clematis that I bought at Malvern. This Luna Lass comes from New Zealand, has got fragrant flowers, doesn't grow very fast. So what I'm going to do is pot it up, put it up on a block and have it hanging down. And by the way, if you do buy one of these, it likes a little better drainage than most clematis. This needs good compost, but also added grit, so it doesn't get too wet. And also because it's in a pot, I'll be able to protect it in winter if I have to. It's not as hardy as some clematis. So much for this level. But then, when we go up, we come to the temple of scent. Just done this in the last few weeks. Chestnut posts sunk 2 feet in the ground, a few bean sticks over the top for shade, and then the idea is to have climbers climbing up each of the posts that will smother it all, so we'll be able to sit here, surrounded by scent. I want all these to be evening scents, so the colour scheme reflects that. White, creams, pale yellows. These are colours that are more visible at night, so therefore they attract evening pollinators, so the plant is pulsing out scent to bring them in, and hopefully we can have the benefit of that. Right, let's get planting. I've got a really good honeysuckle. This is a variety that is new to me. It's called Sensation, with exceptionally good fragrance. Now I'm going to plant this round the back of the support, so it just has a little bit of shade. But it is important if you're making a scented garden of any kind not to get carried away with scent. You need to focus just the same as if you're doing colour. Whereas if you just have a mass of scent, it's like emptying perfume bottles all into a pot and saying, well, smell that. So try and select what you like and limit your choices. You don't want to be bombarded by conflicting fragrance. But we will pop this chap in the ground. nice roots, and plant it very simply. This soil is good. I've added a little bit of garden compost, and when it's all planted up, I'm going to mulch it with mushroom compost. So that's the time when it will have a little bit of feed, but no need to do any more than just plonk it in the ground and obviously give it a really good soak. So that will be trained up, and I'll tie that in, and it will quickly grow up that post. Now the next thing I want to put in is a peony. And she's more than any old peony, she's a duchess. Duchess is a lovely white, strong peony. Now, when you're planting peonies, herbaceous peonies that is, the important thing is to give them good soil and to make sure they don't dry out. And you want to plant them a little bit deep, but not too deep. Gently take it out the pot. In we go, little one. There you are. So I've got the top of the plant about an inch below the soil, and I'll mulch this, which will both keep the moisture in and also cover it over. So we pull that round. I've firmed it down. I'm going to give that a good soak. Peonies, to get a good start, mustn't dry out. And if you mulch it, don't mulch over the crown. Mulch around it, but don't bury that crown. And not only do they look good, but they can smell wonderful too. But now it's time to return for our second visit to Sissinghurst. And the head gardener, Troy Scott-Smith, is returning it to the true spirit that was created by Vita Sackville-West and Harold Nicholson when they made the garden in the middle of the 20th century.
I think Sissinghurst really was one of the gardens post-war that really taught people how to garden again. What gardens could be, you know, how nice they could be, how they could be part of and enhance your life. It was the combination of their two talents as well which made the garden, their two characters. So Harold the classicist and the more of a kind of logical thinker versus the, you know, bohemian life force of Vita really made this garden what it was. The formal lines and the soft planting very easily just go together and it feels effortless. We've been working on this revitalising Vita project for 2 or 3 years now. Sissinghurst is a very successful, popular garden. We have 200,000 visitors, but at its heart, I just felt there was just something that wasn't quite right at Sissinghurst. I think for me, it's not a single thing actually that has happened. It's just a series of interventions, of changes, mostly as a result of increasing visitor numbers. And so, you know, where we used to have grass paths in Vita's time, now those paths are paved with York stone. Where roses hung over paths and sprawled down from trees, they've now slightly been pruned back off the paths. So it's those kind of changes which we're now just trying to address. So here we are then in the nuttery at Sissinghurst, and when you compare it with the White Garden or the Rose Garden, it's not so obvious as this sort of set-piece room, but it's really important in the story of the creation of the garden, because when Harold writes in his diary, he writes about walking around Sissinghurst and feeling really, is this the right space, the right place for them to buy? Then they walked outside and around a corner they stumbled across what they call this nut plat, and then Harold writes, that settled it. It was also quite important because it was one of the first spaces that they started to plant out. They went out into the woods, they saw the wild primroses growing, they selected, you know, some of the more cultivated forms, the polyanthus, and they started slowly to plant them through the nuttery here. So this whole area very quickly became carpeted with great swathes of polyanthus, looking amazing. Here, she let her colour sensibilities just rip. So then the polyanthus, after around 30 years, it became obvious, I think, to Vita and to Harold that they weren't as happy or as healthy as they used to be. And it's common with many plants, really, where you grow just one plant in the same soil for a long time, the soil just literally gets a bit fed up. means that it's a struggle for that plant really to grow. It was actually a number of years later that the Trust finally decided to just do without them. And a big decision at Sissinghurst, you know, to take away something that many people had loved and that Vita and Harold had put in. Last year we planted some little areas of polyanthus back here, just really to give them a chance to see if they thrive or to see if they still turn up their noses. And so far you can see here they seem very happy. So of all Sissinghurst garden rooms, the White Garden was the last one that Vita and Harold created. And it was their idea to do something really special for the Festival of Britain. Here in the White Garden, they really created this space, I think really of magical, epic triumph. It's so easy just to call it the White Garden here, but actually, you know, Vita and Harold called it the grey, green and white garden. And that's much more interesting actually, because, you know, white is quite a simple colour and much nicer to use it in reference with the greys and the greens of the foliage. We understand that actually the colour white for Vita was quite a significant colour. She loved the idea of a barn owl, you know, this white bird floating across the garden. It's a colour that she excluded actually in other parts of the garden, and she didn't choose to use it until they started to make the White Garden here. She talks a lot about soft mounds of grey of Artemisia, you know, with these spikes coming through, perhaps Eremurus, and also flower colours which are just off-white, so it could be very soft yellow or maybe just a hint of pink. And that actually makes the garden that much more interesting and multi-layered. It's important just to, you know, do as much of the research as we can to understand really, you know, what was the garden like. These box hedges, these were all, a couple of years ago, all the same height. We've started to reduce the hedges here, so we've cut the hedges shorter, so we reference the structural hedges of the gardens past. So this is the last of the quince trees that we're planting. We're putting these in, you know, as a substitute to the almond trees. I think the almonds struggled here in the White Garden. It's quite a cold garden. It's north-facing, so there's quite a cold draft that comes through. And I think ultimately that, with our cold, heavy clay soil, was just too much for them. So we think the quince will just be a better, more longer, lasting tree, really, but give, you know, a similar effect to the almonds. Simply try and backfill with this improved soil with a little bit of compost. And we'll, of course, be staking this tree later as well. We often think with my colleagues, you know, what would Vita have planted? And it's very difficult to say, you know, would she have arrived at the same decision? I think you would as a gardener. You know, you adapt to the garden. I'm pretty confident that Vita would approve.
I like the fact that Troy referred to the White Garden being a white, green and grey garden, because that's the secret. White flowers can be really quite hard. They don't give a lot. They're difficult. Whereas as soon as you add as much green as possible in all its various shades and hues, then the white flowers come alive. The Writing Garden, which is a white garden, wasn't in fact based on Sissinghurst. It was inspired by cow parsley. But I've learnt so much from the White Garden at Sissinghurst. And I would say that if you visit a garden that you like, try and deconstruct it. Try and work out what they've done and how they've done it. And then you can use that in your own garden. Nigel. Although we've had some really hot weather over the last week, April was really cold and wet here, and I made these beds, but the soil was nowhere near ready. However, I think now these beds are ready for planting. Now these are purple podded peas, a variety called Blauschocker. Rich purple pods and then green peas inside. I've grown them in root trainers because all legumes have nice long roots, and the longer and the straighter the roots can be, the happier they are. They're ready to go. They're growing down through the cracks. Pop that in and space them out about 6 inches apart. Peas like a sunny, cool position. That's the reason why they're grown in spring and early summer. By July, August, it's got too hot and too dry for them. Although there's plenty of time to sow them now. You don't really sow peas after midsummer. Once you've planted peas, or if you've sown them as soon as they appear, it is important to stake them and to provide them some support, because they've got tendrils and they climb and they twine. And if you don't provide support, they will do all that amongst each other and they get horribly tangled. Now, traditionally, you use pea sticks. So any good, strong prunings that you have that are nice and bushy, or failing that, chicken wire does very well, supported by posts, or netting of any kind. Just something that's strong enough to take the weight of the peas and lots of nooks and crannies and twiggy bits that they can climb into. The only tip, really, when you're putting these in, is angle them inwards so that they meet at the top. And that way, they both support each other, and also the peas find it easier to grow up. My soil is pretty wet, and those peas were well watered, so I probably don't need to water those in. But if you've got any doubt, give them a good soak when you plant or sow them. Then you shouldn't need to water them until they flower. Then it is important to give them a really good soak so they form good pods. Now, peas are easy to grow as long as it doesn't get too hot and they've got plenty of light. But we all have places in the garden which are awkward. And Carol is beginning a new series, identifying those problem places and coming up with perfect plant solutions. And this week, she starts out with those borders, banks and boundaries that can be really hard to find the best plants for.
Most of our gardens have shade, full sun. They can be wet, dry, windy, which means we have the opportunity to grow a wide variety of beautiful plants. But if we want our plants to thrive and flourish, we need to choose the right plant for the right place. Almost all of us have boundaries in our gardens. Sometimes they're fences, hedges, walls. But what to grow in and around them, and very often up them. Often the area at the base of hedges, walls, fences in our gardens can cause problems. It can be wet, dry, it can be sunny or shady, and sometimes it's really awkward to think about which plants are going to grow there. I've come to deepest Devon to have a look at hedges, banks, to see what kind of plants really love living here, to give us lots of clues about what we can grow around our boundaries. Although these plants share the same conditions, each of them has evolved in its individual way to cope with them. Just imagine you're a plant living in this sort of situation. What do you have to put up with? Well, sometimes you're bathed in hot sunshine, but on the very same day, you might be plunged into dense shade. In the winter, these banks will be running with water, and yet, later on in the summer, especially when the canopy comes out overhead, you'll be in drought conditions, but these plants can cope with all of that. How do they do it? They all have different strategies. Look at this little plant. This is Geranium rubescens. It's one of our native cranesbills, and it makes these dense mats of leaves. If you could see underneath this plant, you'd find that the roots are tiny, fibrous. They can spread themselves out under the leaf litter and gather enough nutrients to support the whole plant. It would be unthinkable to be looking at Devon hedgerows without talking about primroses. And here they are in all their glory. They seed themselves right down the bank, and then when each one turns into a really big clump, they just spread outwards from the centre, leaving the old woody bits right in the middle. In our gardens, we have to help them along. We need to dig them up and divide them. But in nature, they can do it for themselves. If these plants are happy growing here in the wild, then there's a good chance that plants with similar characteristics will grow happily in the same sort of conditions in our gardens. How about this for a boundary and a half? Now, they're not the same plants that we saw in the hedgerow, but they've got lots and lots of similarities. Around the edge of the path, you've got periwinkle. You can put periwinkle anywhere at all and it'll thrive. If you're looking for plants for your boundaries, there are loads to choose from. Devon's famous for its ferns, but this one's from Japan. It's Dryopteris erythrosaura. All ferns make a fibrous root mat, so they're very accommodating. You can grow them even in really thin soil. If you've got a hot spot, why not go for one of the perennial wallflowers? The most popular is Erysimum bulls mauve. Here in the lee of these walls, there are these big beds. The soil is really poor. Sometimes in the winter it might be wet through. And then, when the leaves come out on the canopy overhead, the whole place is plunged into dense shade. But they can tolerate it. Not only tolerate it, they can thrive in it. I love this mixture of the dicentra and the forget-me-not. Now, the dicentra is from the States. And here it is with a European plant, this little myosotis, which has flung itself out everywhere. The dicentra grows by sending runners and colonising the ground. And the forget-me-not adds this beautiful touch. You can always be certain that when a plant seeds itself, it's the right plant in the right place.
Of course, plants do have a habit of seeding themselves where you don't want them. They're growing perfectly in the cracks in a bit of paving or out of a wall or in a bed that's the wrong colour. And then here in the wildlife garden, I let things seed. This bed is full of self-seeded plants, half of them weeds, but perfect for wildlife. And to be honest, I like the way it looks. Come on, dogs. Ferns might be very common. This is Dryopteris felix mass, which you see all over the place. But have you ever really seen anything look more exotic than that? You feel that this could be on a coral reef, or a deep seabed, or in the jungle in Borneo. What do you think, Nell? And I love the combination of a sort of seahorse head with octopus tentacles. It's absolutely exquisite. Come on. It's time to plant out sweet peas. Sweet peas are not truly tender. They can take some frost. What I find is that if you plant them out too early, they don't grow. And if they don't grow, they become easy bait for slugs. And what we really want is nice, fast growth so that they become strong, healthy plants. Now, This is a variety called Painted Lady, one of the really old original sweet peas, goes back to the early 18th century. Now, when you're planting sweet peas, you need some sort of support, and they really do like moisture-retentive soil. So if you've got very sandy or thin soil, dig a hole in between the supports and put in a bucket of manure or compost or soil improver, and then mix your soil back in. Other than that, having sowed these 2 or 3 to a pot, I just plant them out 1 pot per supporting stick. If you're buying sweet peas, sometimes you find, as many as a dozen different plants growing in a single pot. If that's the case, I like to take them out of the pot and break them up, because if you have 12 weedy little plants, you won't get 12 times as many flowers. Good, strong plants will produce more flowers than lots of weak ones. Now, as they grow, they will need tying in for about the first 6 weeks. Thereafter, they're strong enough to support themselves, but what is essential, unlike the peas, is to give them a really good watering in. Now, even if you've already planted your sweet peas, or if for some strange reason you don't want to plant sweet peas, here are some jobs you can do this weekend. Few of us have time to keep on top of the garden all the time. But a good trick is to focus on the edges. Clip the verges of your paths or lawns, and immediately everything all around them looks more cared for. It's not too late to sow pumpkins and squashes, although it's something you should get on with. But if you have already sowed them, don't be tempted to plant them out. But you can pot them on, put them in a larger pot with a nice rich compost, and keep them warm and well watered until the nights are warm enough to put them in their growing position. Tulips are dying back fast, but don't cut back the stems or the foliage. Let them die back slowly so the goodness goes into the bulb. However, you should nip off the seed heads. They break very easily, and this stops the energy going into new plants, so it all goes back into the bulb for next year's flower. Of course, this is the blossomiest time of year, just when the flowers on the trees are matching the foliage as it appears, and it only takes a strong wind or a really hot day or a really wet day and it all comes tumbling and spattering down. We wait all winter for these few bright, brief days, so don't waste a precious second of it. Don't be too busy to stop and just relish the moment. And I'll see you back here at Longmeadow, same time next week. Till then, bye-bye.